I had to sit and watch two drug dealers inject a 14-year-old kid with his first hit of heroin. And I was in a situation where I just couldn't intervene because my whole cover would have been blown. What broke my heart was I kept a bit of a track of him, you know, and 4 years later he died of an overdose in a public toilet. So nice to meet you.
The pleasure is all mine. I'm so excited to talk with you, honestly, and I'm very, thankful for your time and for finding, a moment to this conversation. I came across your website. I've read quite a lot about you and your books and all of that. And there's so many different tangents I want to explore with your different activities. I feel like I want to talk with you as obviously as a police operative, as a writer, as a mental health representative as well. So I guess we can start chronologically,
Sure. Sure.
So I've read that, you've been inducted into police workforce quite early, at a quite early age. And I've read some of your motivations to do that, and what were your thoughts when took that decision. But maybe can you walk me through your mindset at the time? What was your decision process like when you done that?
Well, I was only a kid. I wasn't even 17 years old when I started at the police academy. And my motivation was twofold. I grew up in a very challenging household, one of domestic violence, mental abuse, etc., and some not sexual, but physical abuse. And I wanted to escape from that from a very early age. But I was motivated to do something to help protect people from others, from those who would prey upon them. And it doesn't take a psychological degree to figure out why. It was really that young decision to go into a career where I could genuinely help people. I thought about the army and officer training, and I weighed that up, and I thought I'd like the police instead, because it was more of a real life opportunity to do something that was meaningful. So I left home the year I turned 17 and did 2 years in the police academy. In those days, we finished our last year of secondary school in the academy, and then another 12 months of training after that. So it was a benefit to me to get away from an environment that was quite difficult into an academy training, a structured training, discipline, being paid a salary, even though a very small one, to study and train. And that was all a win-win for me.
Okay. So at the time, because especially at that age, I think, not many people are capable of objectively assessing their emotions and, understanding the reasoning behind their decisions. So at the time, were you aware about the source of your motivation as you're explaining it right now?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I've learned a lot in the last few years about mental health and the impacts of trauma on the brain. And one of the things that I've realized and learned is that resilience comes from almost being broken and being able to stand up and move forward in spite of that. So I've realized that I had quite a level of resilience as a child because I'd been in that environment for so long. My very clear thought was I will move into something where I can protect people from others. And that was absolutely, I understood my motivation for sure.
That's fantastic to hear. Were you, at that age again, were you ever hesitant that's the route you want to go to, or were you ever in a position where you maybe was leaning towards, another representation of dealing with those feelings? Teenagers sometimes go to the other route, being utilizing faulty behavior and trying to go, into some sort of a rebellious mode or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, I understand. I sometimes think about that and think I didn't become rebellious until later when I was working undercover. That was my probably teenage angst coming out. But I knew that once I'd made this decision, I had to stay there because there was no going back. So again, that was a great motivator for me, and I'd never thought about leaving. Once I started even training as a young police cadet, I just loved it. I loved the teamwork, the camaraderie, the discipline. I was used to discipline anyway. So I really enjoyed that need to belong to a unit, to a team. And as I say, once we'll talk about my undercover career, I'm sure. But that's where my rebellion came out and stayed for the rest of my career.
Interesting. That's actually a very convenient segue to this aspect. So, I've read that, after being into police academy, you've realized that there's a new unit to be formed and, you express interest in that. Can you again walk me through your process and the moment in time this happened, like you understanding that, the formation of your interest, and, the whole decision of doing that?
Yeah, I wanted to be a police officer who could really contribute in a very meaningful way to policing. Some cops will go in and they'll be in their police force for all their career and they'll do, normal police work, and that's okay for them. I always wanted to be where the excitement was, and once I discovered there was an undercover section, and I would be lying if I didn't say part of it was the ability to grow my hair and grow a beard and put an earring in and look as unlike a cop as I could. I'd be lying if that wasn't part of the appeal, because it certainly was. After 2 years in the police academy with haircut regulations, and this was back in the 70s and early 80s, so everybody had longer hair except for police and the armed services. So, that was part of it. But I at that stage, back in the late 70s in Australia, we had a massive input of heroin that was being smuggled in across a very wide border in Australia. It was fairly unprotected. And the heroin was being smuggled in from the Golden Triangle. And the purity of that heroin was such that people were dying in droves of overdoses. And I remember thinking, if I can do something to try to join that fight against the heroin trade, then I wanted to do it. And that was why I sought out the undercover section and volunteered for it. And having said that, I was not quite 22 years old when I started doing that work, which in hindsight is just way, way, way too young. Way too young.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, you had a pretty strong stance on, the battle against the heroin from what you were saying. What would you say it was based on? Was it from the effect you've seen on people? Was it that particular moment that, helped you to really understand the negative nature of this whole process?
Yeah, I spent almost 3 years in uniform patrol work before I went to the undercover area. And, in the last probably 18 months before I volunteered for undercover, we were almost every shift we worked going to someone who'd OD'd and died. So, we were seeing people dying in toilets and on the street and in flats or small apartments, and it was almost a daily occurrence. And on top of that, and I'm sure you'd understand the addiction of something like that, there were people committing armed robberies, muggings, burglaries to try to get money to feed a drug habit. And I just saw that as something that was an evil, evil trade, because it resulted in death. It created a situation where young people were committing crimes just to be able to feed an addiction. And I thought that was one of the most appalling things I'd ever seen. So, when you're young, you have I wouldn't call it naive, but you certainly have a drive to change the world, you know, to do what you can to contribute as much as you can to a better world. And as cliched as that sounds, and it does sound like a cliche, that was my motivation, my sole motivation, or my primary one. Yeah. And I also wanted the excitement. I wanted the adrenaline. I wanted the danger. I wanted, you know, to do something that was probably out of the movies. Who knows?
Yeah. So, you know, you've mentioned that you've seen a lot of, I guess, gruesome instances of people, you know, suffering from, you know, heroin in any shape or form. So can you walk me through probably, you know, the most memorable moments you had from your early days? Because I can imagine at such an early age what it's like to witness something like that, and how you process these emotions and this impression after that.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
I think the first overdose death I saw, I was probably 20 years old.
Wow.
And we were called to a little squat. You understand what a squat is? It's like a very like a tenement, where a few people were squatting, and one of them had overdosed, and I remember it even now. He was curled up in a fetal position in a t-shirt and a pair of old shorts, and still had the needle in his arm, and had died. And I remember looking at that, thinking how surreal it was, because I'd not seen a dead body since my training. You know, we went to see an autopsy during our training, so you know that's what you had to do. But I actually hadn't seen someone die like that before, and I remember looking at it and just thinking how incredibly sad it was. I was with an older policeman who was, you know, quite cynical and had seen a lot in his life, and he just went, well, just another dead junkie, you know, and that was his way of coping in hindsight. My way of coping was I didn't drink alcohol in those days. I trained a lot. I was a martial artist. I still am. And I was going to Taekwondo training 4 or 5 days a week. Wow. So my way of coping with what I saw was to go to training and, you know, and exercise it out and try to come to terms with it. And I was quite, I became, even at the age of 21 and almost 22, I started to get hardened to it. I started to just go, it's just another dead body, you know, and you look at that, and we have children now who are 30 and 27, and I remember when they were turning sort of 22, I'd look at them and think, my God, you know, if you went through what I was going through, I'd be horrified. But it's just one of those things that you do as a cop, I guess. Yeah, you know, it's hard to explain that any more than that. Yeah.
Would you say this was, and I guess it is, you know, dedicating yourself to some sort of sport and physical activity was a healthy way to deal with these emotions at the time? Or do you think there was something probably that you could better if you could?
Look, I think it was the best way I had. If I was able to talk to that young man, if I was to go back and talk to me at the age of 21, I'd be telling myself to talk to people, to actually tell them how I was feeling. But in that generation, you know, I'm in my mid-60s, in that generation, we weren't encouraged to talk about how we were feeling emotionally. Certainly physically you could, but never emotionally. So a lot
that
of
was a sign of weakness back then?
Yeah, it was perceived as a sign of weakness. Whether it would have been, and then that created a situation where, for a long time, friends of mine and myself just kept everything bottled up inside because we didn't want to be perceived as weak. We didn't want to be perceived as people that couldn't do their job. And policing in those days, you were programmed or socialized to believe that in order to survive, you had to be tough. Rather than understanding the human frailty and, you know, the impact of of all of this on the human psyche. So in hindsight, if I'd known better, I would have sought someone out to talk to, whether it would have been a colleague or a trusted friend who wasn't a cop. But no, I just trained. Trained and just, I guess, got used to it. And I only realised later in life, much later in life, that when all of this had an effect on me in a post-traumatic stress disorder fashion, that I've thought back about, what I had seen and done in my career, and I realised it's like a droplet of water falling into a cup. That droplet of water and all the other millions of droplets of water just fall into that cup regularly, and one day the cup overflows. And that's the best analogy I have of post-traumatic stress disorder. Just one day it overflows, and it's very difficult to put it back in the cup. Wow. So I think that's a lesson, and hence we're jumping forward 30 or 40 years now. Yeah. But that's why my passion is to talk to people, particularly men, about mental health and mental fitness. Yeah. I prefer the term mental fitness. So it started all the way back then. Yeah,
yeah. And, that's such a fantastic mission, especially, considering everything that's happening in society nowadays. And I would love to touch that more in detail. But, to get back through the process you had there. So, okay, you enroll into the undercover program. So tell me what's that like for you in comparison to the more conventional police academy sort of thing. How are you perceiving it? What are the processes there and so on?
Sure. Well, I'd spent, like I said before, 3 years as an operational young cop in patrol, the normal uniform stuff, walking the beat, doing patrol. Yeah. First of all, what I realised very quickly was there was no training program. There was no training at all for undercover work. As crazy as it sounds, it's a much different thing these days. But in those days, the only training was I was partnered up with another undercover for maybe 3 weeks, and I went out with him while he was buying drugs and making deals and meeting people in the drug world. And I just watched and listened and absorbed as much as I could. And then after 3 weeks, I was on my own to do an operation with an informer. So I remember just the culture shock of having to change my personality fairly massively, because I'd been even though my childhood was challenging, my mother, I loved her deeply. She taught me to be polite and to be a nice human being. And suddenly I was in a world where if I was a nice human being, my credibility would have been shot. So I had to change. I had to, just change an entire personality to be someone who I thought would be a drug dealer. Yeah. Wow. And that doesn't mean that I had to be violent. It just meant I had to change. I had to become hardened. Yeah. At the age of 22.
Wow.
And a friend of mine, another friend of mine who was undercover, he started undercover work about 6 months after I did, and he was a couple of years older than I was. I loved him like a brother. I remember we were talking one night, and he said, "This is like acting school, but it's like acting school on steroids. On steroids, you really have to get into this role because your life, your physical well-being will depend on it." And so whilst it was scary at first, and it was quite daunting to be in a drug scene, and not like the movies, we didn't have surveillance people watching us. We were just alone generally. Wow. Carrying a little pistol sometimes, and just by ourselves. So, we were sent sometimes together, sometimes you'd be with another undercover, but 75% of the time you're by yourself. Wow. So I had to learn to cope with the fear. I had to embrace the fear. I had to embrace the character. And as frightening as it was, it was incredibly exhilarating as well. So, you know, I've written somewhere, and I think it's my first book, where I've used the phrase "fear and exhilaration are blood brothers," and that was the problem. It became that was almost as addictive as a drug, I would say. That whole feeling of fear, adrenaline, exhilaration when something goes right, you know, fear when it doesn't go right. But all of that was, for a young man, something that was really difficult to give up, you know. It was just, even though it was crazy stuff, no training, no support really, we had total freedom also to do what we wanted. So I didn't have to report in anywhere. I would just get out of bed whenever I felt like it, do whatever I wanted, go out, you know. I started drinking alcohol. I didn't drink alcohol before I started all this. Hanging around in pubs, or, you know, meeting dealers in seedy parts of town, and, you know, and just living a life that was really kind of cool.
Yeah.
It really was, because it was so far away from traditional policing.
Yeah.
That I reveled in it. You know, I was even for the rest of my career, where if I'd meet someone, they'd ask what I did. This is well after I finished undercover, and I'd tell them I was a cop, and no one would believe me, because I just didn't have any of those traits anymore. You know, and I really enjoyed that too. I never ever wanted anybody to say to me, "Oh yeah, I would have thought you were a cop," because I didn't want to have any of the, you know. Do you know what I mean? I didn't want to. I didn't want to be typecast. I didn't want to be typecast.
Yeah.
So one of the first things I remember when I was just learning how to work undercover, I went to a dealer's house and knocked on the door. And he came to the door and opened it, and he said, "Fuck, man, I thought it was the cops." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, you knock on the door just like the cops do, you know, because cops knock really heavily. And that's when I thought, okay, that's something I need to unlearn.
Wow.
and just little things also, you know, you'll see cops, will, male or female, or they, you know, will walk into a place. They will look at everyone in the room because they look for threats. They'll look for the exits. They'll look for anybody who may be a threat to them, and they do it unconsciously. I had to learn to do that, but not do it in an obvious way.
Wow.
And that takes a bit of practice. Yeah.
I can imagine. Wow.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny you've mentioned this is like, you know, being an actor obviously at very heavy stakes. This was the analogy I was imagining as well. But what I wanted to ask you is that from what you were explaining, obviously, you know, with the little support, with the little teaching and stuff like that, it seems that you had a very, you know, sort of fluid routine between your true personality and the role that you have to adopt. So at such a young age, was it difficult at some point even for you to distinguish yourself from the role that you were getting?
Yeah. You ask really good questions.
Thank you.
That's exactly what it became.
Okay.
So it got to a stage, and it wasn't just me. There were 5 of us at that time who were undercover cops, all men. There were no women in the unit then. And the oldest of us was 25. So the others were around like from 22 to 23, 25, 24, whatever.
Wow.
And we all changed, whether we realized it or not. We certainly became more confident and more self-assured and more self-reliant, but we also changed our personalities to become distrustful. We only relied on each other. I didn't trust anybody else outside my undercover circle. And we became quite insular. So we would only interact with each other when we were able to. Otherwise, if my undercover colleagues were out of town and I was alone, I'd go to training, I wouldn't interact, I'd just leave. And I told all those people I did martial arts with that I'd been fired from the police for drugs. So they thought for 2 years I was a disgraced cop. Yeah.
Wow.
So they didn't really want to have too much to do with me either. And it just, it was. And I look back on this now with the power of hindsight and realize just how much my personality and my character changed. And I do say mostly for the good.
Yeah.
Because working undercover taught me that not everybody who breaks the law is an evil person.
Mm-mm.
And in fact, I saw people who were breaking the law, because of financial problems or other things that had happened. There were certainly a lot of people I did operate on who were just drug dealers for the money. But there were others in that world where I thought, wow, it's not as cut and dried or black and white as you're taught when you're a young cop. So the benefit of working undercover, when I finished that work and I came back out into the normal police world, I wasn't as judgmental as I was before I went in.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me more emotional intelligence,
mm-hmm.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
Had I not done that work, I would have been maybe not as bad as just total black and white cop, because I didn't have that nasty streak anyway. But I wouldn't have been as tolerant of things had I not worked undercover. Yeah,
that's so interesting.
It did make it. Yeah, I've reflected on this a lot, and you can never change the past, but even though undercover work took its toll, I'm very glad I did it, because even now those traits follow through into my age now, and all through my corporate career, where, I was probably more connected with people than I would have been, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that was a benefit.
Wow. It's so sort of ironic when you think about that rather than, when you get into the inside of the crime world, rather than you getting even more appalled by it, you actually got more tolerance, which is such an interesting concept.
Some people.
Yeah, of some people, yeah.
There were some people I met who were selling a lot of cannabis, and cannabis in Australia in those days was very illegal.
Yeah.
And now it's interesting, all these years later, we have medical marijuana and so on, and I support all of that. But in those days, it was a big deal. So I was buying pounds and pounds of cannabis from a variety of drug dealers. And a lot of them I really enjoyed spending time with, because they were good guys. They made me laugh.
Yeah.
They had good relationships with their partners. They weren't abusive. They were just funny pot dealers,
Yeah.
And I felt a lot of guilt and remorse over what I was doing, because when you're an undercover cop, you actually befriend people. So you are part of their life often. There are other drug dealers that you do just straight business with. They were the heroin dealers, like straight business to me. But pot dealers, I'd hang with them. I'd spend a lot of time with them. I'd smoke dope with them, and that creates a massive paradox, because I knew that my job was to have them arrested eventually, but I also had a lot of remorse, because they would be personally upset when they realised that I wasn't who I said I was.
Yeah.
Whereas a heroin dealer or a speed dealer or an ice dealer, whatever, they're a different personality, and they just saw it as a part of doing business. Oh, well, I sold to an undercover cop, I messed up. But, I had a lot of guilt. And that's a tricky thing for a young man to do, is because as a human being, we are very gregarious. Yeah, that's the way we're wired. We love company, and I do. I love people. I'll talk to strangers at the drop of a hat, because I enjoy interacting with people. I enjoy getting to know people, and when I finished the undercover work, I found that I just had this distrust of a lot of people, and in hindsight, it's clear that was because I'd betrayed so many people. You know, so and I didn't realise my thinking at the time. I didn't realise, that was the way that it was all happening to me. But I just I finished undercover work. I was rebellious, as I said before. This was my later delayed teenage rebellion. But I was rebellious. I was cynical. I was distrustful. I was incredibly outspoken. And in a policing organisation, it's still very paramilitary. So there's a rank system, and you're not supposed to question orders from above. I didn't care. I'd call it as I saw it. So all of that had a major impact, and it wasn't just me. All of my other undercover friends were the same. Because we all I only did 2 years, only 2 years of it. Larry, my friend, did almost 5. God. But when we came back into the normal world, we would still only really socialise with each other because we didn't particularly trust anybody else. So that was a human consequence of that sort of work. Plus, it just changed lifestyles,
Yeah. It's amazing. I was literally
drinking a lot. I was doing all that.
Yeah. I was literally going to ask you about that, by the way. It's very interesting that you sort of answer it in advance, because I can imagine, as you've mentioned, that through your work, you're meeting people and you're like, it's such a shame we're not meeting under other circumstances, because I can see you being a friend, but eventually you have to arrest this person. And I can imagine this can give you quite the mental toll. And, I don't know what...
mental,
did you have a moment where, obviously you had such moments, but where it was really, really difficult to fulfill your job due to personal feelings that you had towards someone?
Look, there was one guy, this operation I did, I was buying a lot of heroin.
Yeah.
And there was a guy on the fringes, I suppose, of the network who was selling a lot of weed, a lot of dope.
Yeah.
And he kept offering me this high quality weed or cannabis. Yeah. I don't know what the terminology is in Sophia, but he kept offering me weed, same thing. Yeah. He kept offering me some very high quality stuff, and I kept saying no, man, no, because I liked him so much. I knew that if I bought from him, he would be arrested at the end of the operation when it was all over. So I kept saying no, and I could see he used to think to himself, because my assumed identity, I was a heroin dealer and I was making a lot of money out of it. That's why I was buying all this heroin and buying bigger quantities and bigger quantities. And of course, it was all going to, it was all being vouchered and became exhibits in the court case. So I certainly wasn't selling it. But I portrayed that pretty effectively. And I could see he was thinking, man, this guy. So he's moving a lot of smack, and that he's making a lot of money. That's great. But my gear's really good, So about, I don't know, a month before the entire operation had closed, because I got very close to the importer, and so I was making my way up the chain. He came to where I was staying, and he had 100 Buddha sticks of weed, this compressed cannabis, which was just primo, that was coming in from Thailand, and he said, mate, I've got 500 of these. Here, I've got 100 with me. Have a sample of a couple of them. This is just top. And I thought, oh man, I can't say no. So I bought it all from him. And then when the operation was closed, in those crazy days, everyone that I had bought drugs from was told that I was a cop. Just doesn't happen now, but it was just crazy. So that added to the feeling of danger every time you went somewhere, thinking, my God, someone's going to recognise me. And And he said, yeah. He said, I get that. And they said, do you want the undercover agent to come into the interview and disclose everything that you've done? He said, no, I don't want to see him formally, but I'd love to have a chat. And this detective came out and said he doesn't want anything formal, just wants to say hi. And I went, sure. And I walked into the interview room and he said, I understand now, mate. Damn, I know what you were trying to do. And he stood up and shook my hand and said, I get it. And I felt so bad because he went to jail for two years. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But the cool part of that story was after he was released, I'd finished undercover. I was a junior detective in the drug squad. And he rang the drug squad office and asked for me and left a message. And he said, oh, look, I'd like to meet him at a hotel to have a beer. I went, nah. So I took a couple of guys with me just to sit in the area, just to watch my back. And I went in and said hello. And all he wanted to do was have 2 beers, have a chat, say no hard feelings, and that was it. And that was precisely, he went, oh, man, I get it. You were doing your job, no hard feelings. And so I said, I really liked you, dude. That's why I kept saying no. He said, I know now. I get it now. So that was, yeah. He and I could have been really good friends in another life,
Wow.
But on that job at the same time, I had to sit and watch 2 drug dealers inject a 14-year-old kid with his first hit of heroin. And I thought he was about 17 or 18, not that would have made it any better. Yeah. I didn't realize how young he was. And I was in a situation where I just couldn't intervene because my whole cover would have been blown, the operation would have been blown, and I just thought, wow. And after everyone was arrested, I found out how old he was. And what broke my heart was I kept a bit of a track of him,
Mm-hmm.
And 4 years later he died of an overdose in a public toilet.
Wow.
And that just broke my heart. So they're 2 examples of the extremes.
Yeah.
That as an undercover cop, the sort of stuff that can happen,
Wow. Jesus. So what would you say this is, I guess, or rather, I'd like to ask, was there a situation, or rather, what was the most difficult situation you had to deal with in real time as an undercover agent? Was there a situation where there was, you've experienced fear for your life, fear for your undercover, where you were close to being recognized or anything like that?
Yeah, quite a few. One that's really that I've written about again. I was in North Queensland with Larry, the guy I mentioned before who talked about acting school.
Yeah.
and for a change, we were partnered up, so you had someone to work with, which was great. But one night, he and I were out. We'd met some drug dealers. We were getting very close to one particular dealer who just had a lot of menace and violence about him, but was very well connected, and he was a target. So we went to a nightclub in Cairns, and I'd gone to secondary school in Cairns for about 2 years, and I hadn't been there for a long time. And this time I had a big long beard, and my hair was sort of dyed blonde, dirty blonde or something, and I had, we tried to change our appearance as much as we could with each operation. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty comfortable. No one had recognised me, and we walked into this nightclub, and the barman came over, and it was a guy I'd gone to school with.
Oh.
And I recognised him immediately, and he looked at me and said, Keith. I thought, man, you haven't seen me since 10 years, or whatever, 8 years or something. And I looked completely different, but he recognised me, and Keith wasn't the name I was using.
Oh.
So, and I remember I looked at the criminal, the target, and he just looked at me with this piercing look that was, sent ice up and down my spine. And I found out why later. But I just turned to this barman, this ex-girlfriend, and yelled at him and called him all sorts of pretty bad names. Told him he got the wrong guy, and just to bring us our fucking drinks, and just to be a hard, tough man like I'd become accustomed to being.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the shock on his face, and he thought, no, I've got the wrong guy. And so anyway, that all resolved itself, sort of, because one of the biggest risks about being undercover is being recognised, not by someone who will call you a cop, but someone who knows you're a cop, like a schoolmate or a friend or family or something. That's one of the biggest risks. So anyway, the next day, I spoke to Larry about it and said, we were both using assumed names. I said, damn, I'm going to go in and see this guy and just tell him what's happening just in case. So I went in, found him, the schoolmate that is, and said, look, this is what I'm doing. Had to say what I did, blah, blah, blah. And he said, okay, why don't you bring this guy back in to the bar? Because he actually owned it. He'd done pretty well for himself. Bring him back in. I'll apologise. I'll get free drinks, and I'll make him feel special. And I thought, man, that's perfect. So that's what happened. And so all the suspicion went away. But at the end of the operation, when everyone was arrested, we found out that this guy was an escaped prisoner from another part of Australia. He'd been doing a life sentence for a double murder. So he was a violent, vicious man. Yeah. But on the other side of the coin, we got on very well. Again, affable, funny, just a murderer. And when he was arrested and charged, he confessed that he was setting me up to kill me So I was setting him up to buy about 100 pounds of weed. And in those days, that would have been about $150,000, which was a lot of money in the mid-'80s. Yeah. And he was setting me up to kill me for it.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. Jesus,
exactly.
That's...
And I remember when I was told, I was like 24 years, because I'd finished undercover and I'd gone back into it for this job. So I'd been pulled back in. So I would have been, 24, maybe 25. And I remember when I was told, going, fuck, man, I thought we were friends. Which is the way you just cope with funny stuff.
Wow. This is really like straight out from a movie story.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? But it's true. It's all true. Yeah. Yeah.
Were you did you need to get involved in any sort of violent situations, like fights, and or was it more like just the psychological welfare?
It was more the psychological approach. Yeah. There were a couple of instances where I punched a couple of people, or had to. But it was never got to the stage where I had to fight for my life. It was more because I learned very quickly how to either talk my way out of a situation, or take the front foot and have that perception of violence, that ability to do violence, which often people will back away from. Yeah. So there were situations where I'd produce my gun and just put it on the table and go, hey, I'm not fucking around here. Yeah. I had a situation one night where a biker produced a gun, and I went, I pulled mine out and put it on the table, and he went, oh man, I want to buy that. How much can I buy it for? I went, fuck you, man, get your own. So all of that's the sort of stuff that was funny, even though it was dangerous. But you just became a little desensitized to risk, I think. Yeah. And that's when I knew it was time for me to go and get away from it, because it was just becoming too much of an addictive lifestyle. Yeah. So, and I knew if I'd stayed there, I wouldn't have been progressing through my career. Wouldn't have done that any good. So, so I decided to leave and then became a trainee junior detective, I suppose. So back into investigating crime and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's so. I'm interested to hear, because this whole lifestyle, the duality of the life you had, sounds absolutely surreal to be involved in, right? And
sure.
You've mentioned a couple of times the rush and the excitement out of it, and I've read that you were mentioning this quite a few times in terms of getting yourself addicted to it. So what was you refer to that, but what was dealing with that at the time? Because like you're waking up one person, then you become another, then guns, drugs, fear, excitement, but then you need to go to bed. And did you have like a proper personal life back then?
No.
Oh wow.
No.
Yeah.
No, because there was no personal life. There were a couple of girls I met when I was using another name, etc., and that's just sort of fleeting stuff that happens in the world every day. But there was no personal life because I couldn't commit to anything because I didn't know how long I'd be in one place for.
Yeah.
So I just chose not to. That's okay. That was a consequence of it.
Yeah.
But in between, so if I wasn't being deployed on an undercover job, sometimes I might have 2 or 3 weeks where there was nothing happening, and I hated it because it was almost depressing because once you're on a high of all of that adrenaline and you're operating and what I understand now, all the cortisol that would have been running through my brain, and then you come from that to doing nothing, it is almost like a depressive state because I'd go, oh man, I'm bored. I want to do some shit. This is just crazy. So, I'd go to a hotel, a pub. Call them pubs over there. I guess. Exactly. I'd go to a pub and I'd be sitting there. I'd talk to the barmaid or whoever and try to just identify who I could buy drugs from. When in fact I wasn't officially being deployed, so I'd start a couple of jobs that way because I needed that adrenaline hit. And again. In those days, there was no psychological counselling or debriefing. So a lot of my friends were the same. And if we weren't doing that, we'd be hanging out together, just drinking like fiends, smoking weed, drinking, doing all the absolute shit that cops should not do. We'd be doing it. And I don't mean anything illegal apart from the drug use, of course, but, just partying like there was no tomorrow. Partying like we were rock and roll stars. At the age of 23, man. Wow. So, as I said, I made this. I had enough self-awareness to know that I needed 2 years was enough.
Wow.
2 years was enough because I had to get back and get a semblance of some normal life again.
Wow. It's very interesting because, recently I spoke with a war veteran, and the way they describe the feeling of, being in Afghanistan or Iraq and then going back to a normal life is very similar to what you were saying in terms of that. Yeah. You're sort of missing it and you're sort of associating your personality to who you are there. And then it's very difficult to adjust to a normal life routine. It's like part of you is missing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know a lot of veterans. I've met a lot of veterans over the last 4 or 5 years since my books were released and the work that I do now. Yeah. And a lot of guys I know who've been in Afghanistan, Iraq. Yeah. They all say the same thing. Yeah, spot on. That when you're there, you want to come home, but when you're home, you want to go back there.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's a strange part of the human psyche.
Wow. Yeah. And okay, you finish with your undercover activity. You get back to normal-ish life routine. So what was the process for you to adjust to it, to overcome this need of excitement and to, adjust to a whole different life cycle?
Well, that was the problem. I didn't. I then sought out and volunteered for or applied for special operations, which was the special weapons and tactics, counter-terrorism, high risk, submachine guns, all of that stuff. I don't know what the equivalent is in Sophia, but you'd have it.
Yeah.
The elite police tactical units.
Yeah.
So I applied for that, and that was my next source of adrenaline and excitement and rush.
Wow.
Yeah. And the problem with that was, and I'm mindful of our time because this would take another 2 hours, but I loved it. I loved it. And I was trained as a bomb disposal technician. I did that course for the Army. Wow. I was sent to train with our Special Air Service, who are the elite soldiers.
Yeah.
So I trained with them, and I became one of the first full-time operators in this police tactical world in the state. Loved it. And the major pivotal part of my life that sent me on a path of what I know to be PTSD was, 4 or 5 years after I'd started in that world, my team and I did a raid on a house seeking to arrest an armed offender, an armed robber who was a psychopath. He'd killed 2 people already. He was just a vicious man.
Wow.
And we raided the house and he opened fire on us. And one of my team members was killed. Another one was badly wounded, and 2 of us killed the offender. And I went through such a period of grief and joylessness and trauma, essentially, because I blamed myself for what had happened because I was planning it. All years later, I realised completely that was without any basis. But it was what's called survivor guilt, and it was it's a terminology for what's the word I'm searching for a condition. Yeah. So I had massive survivor guilt. I had suicidal ideation. I had darkness and sadness and all of that I hid from everybody. Because we go back to what we were talking about before. In those days, you weren't encouraged to talk about how you felt. So I hid it from everybody. And it took me probably another 2 years to realize that I had to leave that tactical world. Because just like undercover had changed me, this was changing me. Because I just had such darkness in my soul that I wanted to be on operations where there was every chance to kill someone. And again, it doesn't take a psychologist to work out why. That was pure revenge. Yeah. So that was, that was a terrible time in my life. It was. I remember there was a girl I knew who was just a friend who I'd known for some years. And I remember after all this had happened, we caught up for a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or something. And she said, "My God, whatever's happened to you has taken away the smile from your eyes." And I remember thinking, maybe she's got a point, because there was no psychological support. No one really knew the impacts of trauma on the mind in those days.
Jesus.
And that was a terrible time. I had been married. I woke up one morning and I couldn't be married anymore.
Wow.
I was so damaged. I literally woke up, and I'll forever be remorseful about this. But I said to my wife, "I can't be married to you anymore. I've got to go somewhere." And I slept in my office for 3 days, and I had no plan. It was just a horrible, horrible time of darkness. And thankfully, eventually, I worked my way through it. But there were other things I did in policing that were pretty dangerous. And I have been asked whether I had a death wish or not. I don't think I did. I just had this urge to be involved in anything that was dangerous, probably so I could feel. I think. And then I left the police. I resigned 20 years after I started because I was just heartbroken, and I couldn't define it, but I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was offered a role in the corporate world and took that up and left policing. It was, handing in my identification and losing my purpose and my identity was really tough. and I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
And then that was 1995. 11 years later, I'd moved states. I'd remarried. I was fairly successful in the corporate world, had a senior position, and had a massive anxiety attack. No catalyst, no cause, just the whole world crashed.
Yeah.
And that's when I started the path of counselling. Yeah, and started learning a lot about myself then, and that really brought me to self-realization, to acceptance that I was damaged, that I needed to take some very definite, concrete steps towards fixing myself. Not just for my benefit, but for my family's benefit, for my children, for everybody I held dear. That was a hell of a long process. That was an up and down process. It was peaks and troughs. It was a lot of tears, a lot of self-recrimination, all of that journey that I'm sure everybody who's gone through the mental health journey would understand. And it ultimately got me to the stage where I started writing some stories, and lo and behold, the stories turned into books, and they were published, and here we are. You and I are chatting.
Yeah, that's such a wholesome cycle, and I think it's it's all admirable that you've went through all of this and you still have the self-assessment and the objectivity to realize everything that you are and how to deal with that, because I feel like not many people have the chance to do that, and just reaching some sort of a negative outcome due to inability to deal with the emotions they have, which it's such a sad thing.
Yeah. It is, mate. I've had five friends have killed themselves along the way, and it's a very sobering realization that I could have gone down that path.
Yeah.
But I think that the resilience that I built up through my life pushed me through that. But the big change for me was realizing that there was a name for it. And I remember the first time I was formally diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, I felt strangely powerful and empowered.
And relieved,
because now I knew that. And relief, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Because I hadn't been imagining or exaggerating or inventing.
Yeah.
And then once I realized that it was a disorder and the brain had been affected, I thought, okay, right now, there's got to be a way that I can move through this, because if it's been identified, treatment paths have also surely been identified. So, I took some, did it without drugs. I used antidepressants for a couple of years, but just some really good counselling, guidance, research. Talking to other people. Talking is such a powerful tool.
It is.
And so all of that journey, that's when I started writing. I started writing as a catalyst to let some stuff out. And as I said, I'm still a little bit shy is not the right word, but I'm certainly self-effacing about the fact that I'm a published author and that the books have done so well, because I still find it hard to believe, that hell, who wouldn't want to read my stories? Apparently a lot of people do. But it was just such a positive thing to go through, to realize that was something that resonated with people. So, I've lost count, to be honest, mate. So many people contact me through either Instagram or personal messenger and tell me how much they've appreciated reading and how much I'm helping them to understand. If I'd known all those years ago that, as Gabriel Maté, who's a Canadian doctor talks about the trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens to you as a result of what happens to you.
Yeah.
If I'd known that all those years ago, I would have gone, damn, now I can understand a little better.
Yeah.
And it's just such an important topic, I think. And I'm sorry, I think I've taken over your interview. But,
No.
It's such an important topic that I feel that, you know, every opportunity I get, I need to talk about it so that maybe someone who listens to this, if he or she is sitting at home and they go, wow, I'm not the only one thinking that way and I can get better, that's great. You know?
Yeah.
We only positively impact one person. That's beautiful.
Absolutely. And, you know, you again pretty much answered my question in advance. You know, I love that, you know, this very natural flow between the change of topics, because I was going to assume that writing for you was sort of therapeutic and sort of helped you to, you know, go through your past and see how the different experience shaped you, you know, and all of that. And something else I want to ask you, I think it's again, a very beautiful situation that you're in, because we started the conversation by you saying that your main motivation and idea to get into the police force was because you wanted to have a positive impact and to be able to contribute in a positive manner to people. And I find it very interesting that you are now achieving this effect as a writer and as someone who is, you know, telling their experiences and help people in that way. Does this give you another sense of fulfillment of this initial existential motivation, I guess, that you had?
Yeah, absolutely, 100% it does. It's given me such a sense of purpose at this stage of my life, you know, that I find even more fulfilling than when I was in the police force. Yeah. You know, so because now I'm achieving, I'm touching lives and positively impacting on people without the need to, I don't know, ruin their lives by arresting them or, you know. I still use humour a lot as best I can, but I just have such a sense of satisfaction, you know, in this. And what I do now, I don't work full time anymore. I left the corporate world, thankfully, a few years ago. But I do a lot of keynote presentations to organisations, range of organisations, because the philosophy behind mental fitness and addressing trauma and understanding resilience and recovery transcends everything. Doesn't have to be first responders or military. Absolutely everybody, you know, from not-for-profits to very profitable corporations, they're still comprised of people, and everybody has some degree of trauma in their lives. That's just what comes with being a human being. And the earlier that we can understand and accept that, the better. But even, you know, at middle age, whatever age you are, if you go, right, that's okay to say that I'm struggling, and it's okay to ask for help. Again, that's such a positive message, and it really, really does give me a massive sense of satisfaction to be able to help to do that, you know. Yeah, it's very cool.
Amazing. When you were writing the books, and when you were going retrospectively throughout your life and your different experiences, what was the part of your life that stood the most to you in a way that you haven't realized its effect on you in the past, but it made you click and be like, wow, I'm now understanding what this did to me and how this affected me as a person?
Okay. You ask really good questions.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
No, it's great. I would say the most profound chapter I wrote was about the shooting murder of my teammate and the wounding of the other.
Yeah.
I was still dramatically and emotionally affected by that all these years later.
Yeah.
That happened in 1987.
Yeah.
And that book, my second book, is where I wrote about that. And I wrote that. It was published in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the chapter I wrote last because it still had such an emotional impact on me. And when I wrote it, then I edited it, then I went back to my original draft because I thought, I'm just going to go with how I originally felt when I put words on paper.
Yeah.
And that was putting that down and telling Pete's story, Peter being the teammate who was killed.
Yeah.
And telling his story, for me, keeps his memory alive because he was an incredibly brave man. And if you read about what happened that morning, you can go, wow. And having the ability to put a voice, I think, to that morning quelled a lot of my internal demons as well. I was, even up until then, I found it very difficult to talk about that morning without crying. Once I realised that it was okay to cry, I cry now at the drop of a hat. Like in Australia, we say the drop of a hat, which means very quickly.
Yeah.
I cry now at stuff that I just go, wow, I'm crying again. Good. And because all of those emotions were kept behind a dam for so many years that, but with that job, that was the only thing I would cry about for years. I'd start to talk about it, I'd cry.
Yeah.
And so I found that I couldn't talk about it until I wrote about it. And when I wrote about it, I now talk about that during all of my presentations I do. And I say, hey, this is my worst day at work, the worst day of my working life, and I talk about it all. And I'm able to do that still emotionally, but very powerfully, because it gives me the ability then to talk about the impact that had on my mental health and the road to recovery. And I say to people, and we'll talk about this when we chat again, but I say to people, you don't need to be in a gun battle to have post-traumatic stress. It's being a victim of crime, victim of sexual crime. There's a particular definition that the World Health Organization has. And that's post-traumatic stress. But you can also have trauma in your life, and it has a similar effect on the brain. Yeah. So with that, to get back to answer your question, that was the last chapter I wrote, even though it was out of chronological order.
Yeah.
And that was for me almost a closing of the door on that grief.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was in. I remember I was sitting in this study I'm talking to you from now. This is where I wrote it.
Yeah.
I remember finishing that chapter, going, and I literally sat back and went,
wow.
It was like the weight was gone.
Wow.
Yeah. Amazing.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that's, such a good way to finish this part. I'm, even more excited to continue the conversation at a good point. Thank you so much. This was, it's so fantastic to speak with you and to hear your thoughts on such fascinating experiences and concepts. It's these sort of conversations are why I've started doing all of this. So thank you for your openness and
fantastic
for sharing all of this. Thank you again for your time and openness, and I'll talk to you soon.
Really great to talk to you. And in Australia, we say mate. We call our friends mate.
The UK stuff is the same, so that's fine.
Oh, there you go. Well, all right, thanks, mate.
So,
nice to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, chat soon.
See ya.